Welcome to the DFO Fantasy Show Team Preview Series. I'm managing editor of dailyfaceoff.com, Brock Seguin. Today, we'll be covering the Anaheim Ducks. Anaheim is not projected to be very good again this season as the rebuild continues. According to the sportsbook, they have the 7th lowest implied team total and the 4th worst team in the Western Conference as we enter the season. Now let's take a look at the Daily Faceoff projections for the 2025-26 fantasy hockey season. We'll start with the skater group where no one really jumps off the page at you when you look at these projections. However, outside of Jackson Lacombe, no one on the roster is being picked before pick 150 in the very early Yahoo ADPs. So there's potential for some great draft day value with some of these skaters. Troy Terry, for example, is a player that has averaged 28 goals and 37 assists for 65 points per 82 games over the last 4 seasons, and he's currently going undrafted. Now, 4 years ago, he scored 37 goals, and that season's starting to look like the outlier at this point, but even if you get the 24-goal, 39 assists, 63-point pace that he's been on the last 3 years, he'll be a solid contributor that literally costs you nothing, if not very little, on draft day. Leo Carlsson's also an interesting target for fantasy owners, especially ones that want to wait on centers, and if he becomes your third center on the roster, it could be great value. He'll only be 21 years old this season, is coming off an extremely strong finish at 2024-25, where he scored at a 77-point pace in his final 31 games. If he can build off that, he'll become a great late-round sleeper this year. Mason McTavish and Cutter Gauthier are two others that finished last season very, very strong and are at good ages for breakouts this season. McTavish scored at a 76-point pace in his final 27 games, while Gauthier was at a 33-goal, 30-assist pace in his final 30 games. All 4 of Carlsson, Terry, McTavish, and Gauthier represent players that are great late-round values so far this year. Aside from that, Mikael Granlund is coming off a strong year. He'll probably end up just being a waiver wire target most of the year, maybe a streaming candidate at best. Probably won't have long-term value. And Chris Kreider's an interesting name to keep an eye on, although at this point in time, he's become mostly a one-trick pony with the hits drying up over the last couple of seasons. So he'll be a nice pickup when, you need some goals on the wing. But outside of that, I don't think he's going to have long-term value either. On the blue line, the previously mentioned Jackson Lacombe had a run from the start of December to the end of March where he had 39 points in 51 games. It was a 19-goal, 63-point pace. I'm not sure he'll reach that level this season over the full year, but even a slight improvement in the Ducks' power play this year, and Lacombe can definitely build on last year's breakout numbers. He had just 9 power play points, and that's a number that I expect to improve this year. They were the worst power play in the league a season ago. His early ADP right now is a high-end number 3 fantasy defenseman, and I think if he's your number 3 blue liner, you're in a great spot at that position. Outside of Lacombe, there's not much to love on the Ducks blue line outside of banger leagues where Radko Gudas is obviously a stalwart there. Jacob Trouba will also be a strong contributor in leagues that count peripheral stats, blocks, and hits are something both of those guys do extremely well. And now between the pipes, it's Lukas Dostal's crease now that John Gibson is in Detroit. Peter Mrazek shouldn't pose much of a threat to his workload, but how many starts can Dostal handle will be the true question. He started to slow down a little bit at the second half of last season, but right now he's currently only being drafted as a low-end number 2 fantasy option, and I think if you can land him as a number 3 goalie, he becomes a great play for your team because he has that upside built in that we saw last year. Before the Four Nations Faceoff, he was 15-13-4 with a .911 save percentage. Great numbers for a number 3 goalie, but he finished the season a little bit on a sour note, so it'll be interesting to see where he lands between his first half and his second half, but there's a lot to build off of, a lot of upside there if you can land him as a number 3 goalie, and if he's your number 3, you can be a lot choosier with your matchups and make him even more valuable. I'm now joined by Derek Lee, Anaheim Ducks writer at The Hockey News. How are you, Derek? Thanks for joining me.
Good, Brock. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Hockey season is coming up quick. Thank you for being the very first of my fantasy team preview series. We're going to cover a couple topics today that are really pressing in the fantasy community for the Anaheim Ducks. But Derek, before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, I just want to know, who is a Ducks player that you think is due for a breakout in the 25-26 season?
Oh, maybe this is a bit of a cop-out, but I think Leo Carlsson's really poised to have a great season. I mean, he had a really good second half last year. He's got great chemistry with Cutter Gauthier. I wouldn't expect those guys to get split up for the upcoming season, even though there's a new coach coming in Joe Quenneville. You just look at the potential that he has, a former second overall pick, and the way that he's been utilized already by the team in just 2 years. I think he's really primed to have a bigger opportunity, of course, and just being pegged as the future number 1 center of the Ducks. I think there's just so much room for him to grow already in his third season.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how Quenneville will dole out the ice time this season. What is your expectation on how Joel Quenneville will handle that ice time? We saw Greg Cronin last year lean very heavily on the Vetrano, Strome, Terry line, but should we expect to see guys like you said, Carlson, even Mason McTavish, see heavier usage this year? We saw it kind of start down the stretch last year. Should we expect them to take a much larger role and maybe the Strome line to take a smaller role this year?
Yeah, I think that should be the expectation. At some point, they want to get in the playoffs. I think that's the goal this year. They've said that this is the goal is making the playoffs, and at some point, you've got to make sure that those young guys, those young pieces, the part of the core, you want those guys to be the ones leading the charge. So I think this is kind of the transition period where guys like McTavish, guys like Carlson are the ones who are taking that next step and are helping lead them to the playoffs. And you got guys like Troy Terry, who are still really great player. He played a lot with Strome and Vetrano last year. I think you look at they added Mikhail Granlund, so it's a really key addition that you kind of want to be in the mix. And so if you have Carlson, Gauthier, and then you add in someone like Alex Killorn, and then you have maybe say Chris Kreider, McTavish, and Terry as your second line, that's a really formidable top six. And then guys like Vetrano and Strome, by being pushed down the lineup, they have better opportunities to play against like weaker competition, so to speak, so that they can help produce as well.
Absolutely. I found Leo Carlson to be one of the hardest players in the NHL to project this season because the offensive numbers haven't quite been there in the first couple of years, but the second half of last year, as you mentioned, were just insane. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he takes off under Quenneville this year. Between the pipes, Lukas Dostal, his workload in 25-26, what are you expecting there? It's the first year without John Gibson in Anaheim, obviously, and he had a great first half last year. Second half, maybe not quite as good. What kind of workload split do you expect to see between Dostal and Mrazek this year?
Right after the Gibson trade, we spoke to Ducks general manager Pat Verbeek, and he said that he kind of sees Mrazek playing maybe 25 to 30 games, so that'd be kind of around the same amount that, well, not the same amount that Gibson played, but the same amount that Dostal played, which was like 50, 55. And we kind of saw during that second half a little bit that Dostal did tail off because of maybe struggling to adjust to the workload or whatever it may have been, just inconsistencies of a young player. But now that he has the starting role because Gibson's gone, he has the new contract. He's basically the guy now, and so I think he changed up a little bit of his training Dostal had. He mentioned that after the media availability for his extension. So just being able to handle a bigger workload, and he's proven that he can do that. He just needs to be more consistent now in how he handles it as the season goes on.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. He was a fantasy darling in the first half of last season, and if he can carry that throughout the entirety of the season, as you mentioned, if this becomes a playoff team, Dostal could be a great fantasy asset this year. And what do you expect, speaking of great fantasy asset, Jackson Lacombe last year seemed like he got better every game. From December onward, he was on pace for 17 goals, 38 assists, 55-point defenseman from December through the end of the season. What do you expect from Jackson Lacombe this season? Is this a player that can take an even further step forward? Is he going to settle in as that kind of like 55-point player? What do you think to expect from Jackson Lacombe this year?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, he had a great World Championships as well for Team USA. Before Zach Werenski came in, Lacombe had the highest ice time among all USA players. So, and even when Werenski came into the fold, he was playing with Werenski on that top pair. So it wasn't like he took a back seat at all. So I think that's really great for a young player's confidence. He even just got invited to the U.S. Olympic kind of like orientation camp for kind of like to be evaluated. And I think that is also just speaks to how much they value him over the last year or so. So I wouldn't expect anything to change in terms of his role as kind of the FA number one for the Ducks right now, because you got Pavel Minchikov, you got Olen Zellweger, but those guys need to kind of find their footing a little bit more, and so it's up to Lacombe to be kind of at that steady presence at the top of the left-handed depth chart. So I don't know who he's going to play with this upcoming season. He played a lot with Radko Gudas over the last two seasons. Just based off of the matchups, maybe that's who he plays with again. But I think anyone you put him with, it's hard to imagine that he'll have a difficult time meshing with them and kind of holding that same role that he did last season.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that could help Lacombe this season is if the power play improves. And they brought in Chris Kreider, who has been a notoriously very good on the power play throughout his years with the Rangers. the Ducks, one of the worst power play in the NHL last season. Do you think bringing Kreider in is a guy that can really help boost that top power play unit and maybe unlock some of this offensive upside for guys like Lacombe and Leo Carlsson this year?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you look at the things that Kreider brings to the table. That's something that the Ducks were really missing. He's a great net front presence on the power play. He knows how to get to the dirty areas. He can play on the penalty kill as well. He's got an insane amount of shorthanded goals over the last few seasons, and I think you look at his goal totals from last year. You look at the offense. There's just a lot of dysfunction around that Rangers organization. So I think you can expect him to have a little bit of a bounce back. Maybe not quite to the numbers that he's had in seasons past, where he's putting up maybe like high 30s, low 40s. But the addition of Kreider, I think that's just, and for how little of cost it came, I think that's a terrific addition to the Ducks, and he just fits in so many roles that they need.
I just have one final question before we move on. Cutter Gauthier, you mentioned him a little bit earlier with Leo Carlsson. Like, he's a player that, if he takes a huge step forward, is just a massive difference maker for the Ducks. Do you just have any quick thoughts on Cutter Gauthier's upcoming season?
Yeah, I think he had a little bit of struggles at the beginning. I think some of that was just being a rookie, just adjusting to a new league as well too, because he only played one game the year prior, and most of that was in college. So I think he just had a lot of adjusting to do, and then he kind of figured it out. I think I want to say like December, he kind of knew what he was getting into, and then once he got put with Leo Carlsson at the end of after the Four Nations break, I think that was when it really clicked for him. He was able to use his speed. He was able to use his shot, especially, even without getting much power play, which I thought was kind of surprising. Is he has one of the better shots on the team, and then he's not even on the power play. So I think if he's able to get more special teams time, he played a little bit on the penalty kill too as well. So if he can kind of become that jack of all trades guy, so to speak, alongside Carlsson, I think you have a really special pairing there.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, after the Four Nations break, he had 11 goals, 11 assists, 22 points in 28 games. That is a 32 goal, 32 assists per 82 game pace. Derek, thank you so much for joining me. Best of luck on covering the Ducks this season, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Brock. Thanks for having me.
Hey, hockey fans, if you enjoyed that video, then make sure you hit the subscribe button right here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. We have you covered for everything you need. Exclusive interviews on The Sheet with Jeff Merrick, all the latest hockey news on Daily Faceoff Live, and you can always get your morning started with Johnny Lazarus and Colby Cohn on Morning Cup of Hockey. Don't miss a minute. Hit that subscribe button.